Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. I'm just giving you a quick video about citing. This is to help support some of what you're doing in the DBQ assignment. I'm sure that you've spent some time learning about citations and MLA in the past, either in history or English class. But just because we've just had this weird, pandemic thing going on, use this in case citing is a little new to you, or also just for the purpose of looking at some of the more awkward types of citations that are included in the DBQ packet. There's a lot of indirect sources. So, sources that are excerpted in the Facing History packet, for example. And in this video, I'm just going to kind of tell you how to cite some of that stuff and give you permission to kind of cut a few corners, basically, in terms of some of the ways that we're going to cite this. And some of this information is just so you're aware and how you would go about citing this, okay? So first of all, history, the discipline of history uses MLA. That's not the case for all disciplines. Maybe in psychology it would be APA or whichever. So as you go about noting citations in other subjects, just be aware of that. And the citing guidelines in MLA are consistently updated. I believe they're on the 9th edition, and a really, really good source for you to use is the Purdue OWL. It is a website sponsored by Purdue University, and it has very, very rich information about citations for all different types of schools of citations, but certainly MLA, and really, really good detailed examples, and they have some videos and things like that. So if you ever have a question, I recommend going to the Purdue OWL. This information is from Purdue OWL, and it's really describing some of the types of information that the MLA citation, regardless of the type of source it might be, what we're really interested in including. And so sometimes you don't have all of this information, but largely this is the way you would put together any source citation that you would put in a works cited page. And you can see, for example, we start off with the author. Of course, that's last name first. And then you can see the punctuation after author is a period. Then next, the title of the source with a period, the title of the container. Sometimes a source is included in a particular container. So it might be a poem, for example, that's in an anthology, or some type of specific piece that's in a larger website of sources. So MLA makes it specific to include the container. Sometimes you even have multiple containers. Other contributors, that's something that you might also have. There might be an editor, for example. So you might have a work that's authored by a poet, but then you might later on have the anthology as a container and an editor of that anthology. A version number, publisher, publication date, and location of the publication is all information that might be included, certainly depending on whether or not it's a website or it's a book or it's a periodical. This citation might look a little bit different, but generally this is the information that you can start to collect anytime you're interested in creating a works cited page. Examples in MLA using the 9th edition, a book would look like this very top one, Henley, Patricia, period, The Hummingbird House. The book is in italics. McMurray's the publisher. The date is 1999. Any other information just isn't available or isn't necessary. In the case of Lundman Susan, the author, there's an individual webpage, How to Make Vegetarian Chili. It's in a parent website, eHow, and the URL is there as well. You may include information that does include the date that you accessed the URL, but you don't need to in the 9th edition. And just note that the container, the website that this article is found on, is in italics, and the URL is not. So eHow is in italics and the URL is not. For a periodical, so something that would be, say, Time Magazine or a journal article by an historian or whatever, it would be in quotation marks. So we have the author, we have period, we have the title of the article, and then the Tulsa Studies in Women's Literature is the name of the journal. And in this case, you have volume 15, number 1, 1996, and the page numbers. Page numbers would be included if, for example, in the book above with Patricia Henley, if you had a few page numbers that you were referring to only, you could include the page numbers as well. When it comes to in-text citations, and ultimately you're seeing some correlation between the way things are categorized in your works cited page. Only the things that are listed in your works cited page were actually cited in text, in the essay. If you were to include sources that were not actually cited in the text of your paper, then you would really have a bibliography, which might include sources that you consulted for background information, but didn't necessarily cite, but a works cited page is basically, these are all of the sources that I cited. So for example, at the very bottom of this page, we could see Wordsworth William, Lyrical Ballads, the name of a book, and Oxford, and a little bit of information about this book. The way in which you could introduce this in the text, you could have some direct quoting going on. So the first two examples, Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and then you have the page number. The way in which romantic poetry is characterized, the second one, romantic poetry is characterized by the, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. The difference between that second sentence and the first sentence is the first sentence includes Wordsworth as the author. If you note Wordsworth as the author in the sentence, you're just going to put the page number. If you include romantic poetry is characterized by the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, you are going to link that to Wordsworth, but because you didn't mention the author's name in the sentence, you would put Wordsworth and the page number in the parentheticals at the end of that sentence. The other thing is Wordsworth extensively explored the role of emotion in the creative process. 263. In this case, the only thing that's different, just like the first one, you mentioned Wordsworth in the sentence, so we only need to cite the page number. There's no quotes in this because it is a paraphrase, okay? So whether you're paraphrasing or you're quoting, you still need to give credit where credit's due and include the page number, okay? So in any case, sometimes using information that doesn't include a page number, in that case, you do not need to have a parenthetical. Sometimes I'll see students do no page number. I don't think that's necessary. Just so you know about containers in MLA, the title of the container is usually italicized and followed by a comma. And here's some examples. This is Jamaica Kincaid with a work noted as Girl, and it is in an anthology of contemporary American short stories. That is the container, and it is italicized. There's also an example here from a TV series, and the very last example, you also have a website, DeWanda Wise, why TV shows make me feel less alone, and it is connected to a particular organization, and that organization's container is within a blog source. So we kind of get the way in which the NIMI is the container, but we get the sense of what it is from the URL. So the website, the entire website is the container where the author's information is found, right? The website is sponsored by ANMI, but is not authored by that organization, okay? Indirect sources, and we have a little bit of this going on. Generally, if you look at MLA, there's a recommendation not to do indirect citing, okay? So if we had more time and access to all of the sources that we were using in our DBQ packet, it would be much better if we actually read some of the sources that are excerpted in some of the facing history documents, okay? So, we're reading something by this member of Congress named Hayes, but it's quoted in, something else, some secondary source, and, we are not going directly to the secondary source and taking the book out of the library. So we're doing some indirect quoting, and I'm kind of giving you permission to do this. If you were doing this in like your HI, I'd say to you, hey, go get the book. You should really be reading in context what you are quoting. If you're ever doing research that is, really dependent on, research, like you're doing History Day or you're doing a college level paper, you really do want to find the original source, maybe even a, JSTOR article or whatever. But for our purposes, we know we're using some excerpts. We know that we're interested in kind of the original authors, and we're kind of accept that Facing History has done some of their homework and they've kind of created some source excerpts for us that are going to be worth their salt. Okay. How we can cite these, okay? And you can have indirect sources in Indirect Sources, which is what we have. We might be looking at Hayes, who's a member of Congress in the Reconstruction time period, and it's quoted in, from another source, and then it's also quoted in the Facing History source. We're going to leave off the Facing History source. We all know that that's where we got this information from. We're just going to save ourselves a step and focus on practicing the citation, citing the original work in the quoted citation that's available on each of the texts that you all have. Okay, so Hayes might be the author that you talk about in the sentence. Okay, but you might note in your sentence that this is noted by, and then put the secondary source where you got the information, the one that's listed on the excerpt that you have in the DBQ packet. The way you can do this in the text when you do your citation is quoted in, the name of the secondary source. So, here we have as noted by or argued by, Hayes, member of Congress, blah, 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 Reconstruction, blah, 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 blah. And then in your parentheticals, quoted in, this particular last name, just the last name and the page number. Okay, that's kind of what we're interested in. When you go to your works cited list, you're going to use the author's name of the secondary source. Okay, so there's a connection between your in-text citation and the indirect source in the works cited list. It's really that source that's listed. So you're not going to list Hayes in your works cited list. You're going to list the individual who had published Hayes' quote, okay? And that's what makes it an indirect source. Had you really read, Hayes' information, it's, we have, some sense of what Hayes said because it's being, quoted in this other work, but, we're really getting it indirectly, okay? So we're not looking at, we're going to assume we're looking at Fleischman's work. We're looking at an excerpt of it, of course, but just kind of accept that that's how we'll do it. And if that makes sense to you, we'll use that as like our kind of collective framework for citing. The other thing, and this is the last thing, is the Brinkley text. This is the textbook packet. Feel free to use this text citation in text. You can just put Brinkley and the page number. So see the bottom in the top part. You can also add a page number if there's a specific range or set of pages or one page number that you use, but the rest would be okay for using in your bibliography. Okay, I hope that helps, and I'll see you in class.